One. Hey everybody, it's your friend Adam. I'm here with Kent Hovind, and we are going to be having another Think Club debate. Drew Welty is in the background. He's going to be moderating for us. He's going to jump in as needed. If anything goes awry, we settled on a debate topic. We're going to be discussing if slavery is immoral, can evolution explain why? And I am taking the affirmative position. I'm going to go first. I've laid out my argument here. I have about 4 pages. It should take about 10 minutes. We're going to do 10-minute openings and 10 3-minute exchanges. Then we're going to have a 5-minute closing statement. Say hi to the audience, Kent. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm overworked, underpaid, way behind, dead tired, totally broke. But I never complain because nobody cares. No.
That's the best way to be. That's the best way to be.
That's right.
Stay busy.
Okay.
So Drew's channel's link is in the description. Kent's channel link is in the description, and I will start us off. So, if slavery is immoral, can evolution explain why? In order to make the argument that slavery is in fact immoral and evolution can explain why, I must first ask, 1, what is morality? 2, what is evolution? And what is the evolutionary origin of morality? And 3, can the evolutionary origin of morality explain why human slavery is best categorized as outside the moral norm? So what is morality? The father of modern social psychology, Emil Durkheim, defined religion as a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things set aside and forbidden, beliefs and practices which unite into one single moral community called a church, all those who adhere to them. So working from this definition, I'd like to focus on Durkheim's beliefs and practices and define morality as a set of beliefs and practices or a simple set of rules that a community agrees to adhere to. So like individual cells of every living organism adhere to a set of rules which allow those cells to function together as a distinct organism. Morality is just a set of rules that allows individual humans to function together as a distinct society with shared needs, goals, and cooperative functions. So what is evolution? And what is the evolutionary origin of morality? So evolution in its simplest terms is a concept that all organisms are in competition for resources and reproductive success over time. The definition of morality that I've laid out is very important because it casts societies with their differing moral norms and customs as competitors in a Darwinian struggle with one another for resources and members. This concept of societies in economic competition is very much what we see in the world today. And one of the clearest competitive advantages any society can have is size. Large populations peacefully collaborating towards shared economic prosperity can outcompete smaller populations consumed by infighting and perpetual conflict. So these disorganized populations may dissolve as more cohesive societies attract each dysfunctional society's smarter and most motivated members, both growing and enriching the more functional societies at each lesser society's expense. So these are societies in competition. So it is through this evolutionary process that functional societies are elevated in wealth and prosperity, while dysfunctional societies are minimized and eventually eliminated. So this also is the evolutionary framework that has produced the various moral systems we see around the world today. The essential function of these moral systems is to facilitate the peaceful collaboration of larger and larger numbers of people, ultimately incentivizing people to abandon lesser, ineffective, and unproductive moral systems. So can this evolutionary origin of morality explain why human slavery is best categorized outside the moral norm? I think it can. If we conceptualize morality as a set of rules that binds all of those who adhere to them into a sort of Darwinian superorganism competing against other communities, we can start to evaluate the rules facilitating each group's success as it competes in the world against other groups. So moral rules will be judged on their effectiveness in this competition. And sure enough, many of the behaviors most of us agree are blatantly wrong, produce a kind of clear reasoning through this lens. Murder may be good for an individual's genes in the evolutionary sense, but the action can foment conflict within groups, leading to societal dysfunction. The same is true of theft or rape. While these behaviors may be good for an individual's genes, the behaviors create conflict that ultimately weakens the larger community in competition with other communities. So how does the practice of slavery weaken groups in competition with other groups? If we are categorizing behaviors that weaken a group in competition with other groups as immoral, which I'm proposing that we do, and behaviors that strengthen group cohesion and categorize that as moral, then slavery obviously falls outside of this moral-immoral divide. And here are the three strongest arguments why slavery is and should be categorized as immoral from this evolutionary perspective. One, slavery limits human freedom. According to American professor Kevin Bales, co-founder and former president of the non-governmental organization and advocacy group Free the Slaves, modern slavery occurs when a person is under the control of another person who applies violence and force to maintain that control, and the goal of that control is exploitation. This is a barbaric practice which not only strips people of human dignity, it casts their oppressors as self-serving and incompetent human resource managers, cheating enslaved people by stealing their labor. Symbiotic, voluntary, pro-social relationships will always be stronger than involuntary, parasitic ones. The cultural evidence for this is quite clear. Politically stable countries with the highest levels of economic wealth have few people living in slavery, with the lowest rates recorded in nations like Canada, Germany, Singapore, and the United States, while the most impoverished countries have the highest recorded rates of slavery. Since the 2014 civil war in Libya and the subsequent breakdown of law and order, there have been reports of enslaved migrants being sold in public in open slave markets. This is barbaric and a leading indicator in the breakdown of society. Slavery is a terrible practice that may serve some individuals in the short term, but it comes at a great cost to the larger community in its competition against rival communities. Two, the second argument, all people have an equal right to life with the opportunity to better themselves and society. Free people working together innovate faster. Slaves and caste societies have little innovation since the incentive to better society is stripped from the larger portion of the population through the practice of slavery. These societies will inevitably be out-innovated by equal-sized free societies. Joseph Henrich, anthropologist and chairman of the Department of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University, lays this concept out in his book, The Secret of Our Success. Even if beneficial innovations are just randomly stumbled upon, the societies that are able to capture and disseminate those innovations to the whole society are going to out-innovate societies where innovation is stumbled upon and lost, never shared with the wider society. Slavery is an institution that directly disincentivizes the oppressed population from sharing any innovation they may just randomly stumble upon, since the likely benefactors of those innovations are the people actually enslaving them. So innovation will be minimized in any society where slavery is the norm. The last argument, and I'm almost done here, slavery requires a level of violence that erodes social capital. Now, we can think of social capital as the link, as the links, shared values, and understandings in society that enable individuals and groups to trust each other and work together as a team. Social capital is the glue of society, and the institution of slavery weakens this social capital by sustaining a level of violence that is unhealthy for widespread trust and social cohesion. So those are my three arguments. So in sum, I just want to say that morality is a set of rules a community adheres to as it competes against other communities for both resources and members. Communities with better moral systems will grow in both size and prosperity, while communities with dysfunctional moral systems will shrink and dissolve. Slavery is both a behavior and an institution which weakens society through the promotion of conflict and the discouragement of innovation, and therefore is a bad candidate for inclusion in any successful moral system, and therefore, I would argue, is immoral. So that's my argument. How'd I do on time, Drew?
You have 52 seconds left, so that's totally up to you if you want to.
Okay,
just go
no,
ahead and
it's all you, Kent.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. Is our volume okay there, Steve? Okay, got everything worked out. Great. Well, I don't think it's possible to remember everything you read there in the last 9 minutes and 12 seconds or whatever it was.
Well, I can help you out. I'm here.
I'd have to see that in writing and refute whatever I need to line by line. I think defining the word evolution is critical in any of this discussion on this, because what exactly are we talking about? And many words, like the word love, have multiple meanings. You know, someone says love. Well, what does that mean? I love pizza. I love my dog. I love my wife. Those are different kinds of love. There are different meanings to the word evolution. And I go through this in my seminar quite often. There's cosmic. Oh, here, I'll just call up some slides here. I like visuals. People can see what's going on. Let's see, slide number 39. Alt-DV 39. Is the slide showing, Steve? Textbooks often talk about evolution, how life has evolved on Earth. And I point out there we go. Thank you, sir. There are 6 different meanings to that word. And so can evolution explain slavery? Well, that depends which meaning we're talking about. Cosmic evolution, the origin of time, space, matter by the Big Bang. I don't think that's, I don't think there's any scientific evidence for that at all. They say the stars are showing a red shift. Okay, that may mean they're moving away. That's probably true. That could mean the Bible is true, because 17 times the Bible says God stretched out the heavens. The fact that the stars are giving a red shift is not proof or even good evidence for a Big Bang. It's evidence that the stars are giving a red shift, that's all. But the textbooks talk about a phenomenon called cosmic evolution, starting with the Big Bang. Secondly, there'd have to be chemical evolution, where somehow the hydrogen gas from the Big Bang produces all the different elements. I don't think that's logical. Chemical evolution is talked about all over the internet. You can just Google chemical evolution. But the idea that hydrogen could make all the other elements, I think, is ludicrous. How would this happen? And how would this tie in with slavery if hydrogen gas is going to slowly turn to uranium over millions of years? There's no evidence for this. Then there'd have to be stellar evolution. The stars would have to evolve. Nobody's ever seen that happen. Nobody's ever seen any star form. We see stars blow up all the time. Even in Science magazine 20 years ago, the silent embarrassment of astrophysics is we don't know how a single one of these stars managed to form. The origin of stars presents one of the most fundamental unsolved problems of contemporary astrophysics. No one understands how star formation proceeds. It's complete guesswork. It's complete theory. There's not any scientific evidence to show it can happen, or even that it can happen, because as you try to squeeze gases together, Boyle's gas law comes into play, and the pressure increases and drives the particles apart. So we see stars explode, novas or supernovas, and that's as far as it goes. And there's a whole lot of stars out there. 70 billion trillion stars is the current estimate of how many there are. That's a trillion, billion, quadrillion, quintillion, sextillion. Lots of stars. Okay. So, and there might be 3 times as many as that. They're thinking there might be more, according to the latest estimate. The Bible says God made the stars, so I don't have a problem with that. But there's a lot of stars. Let me just skip up here to organic evolution, the origin of life. I don't think the evolutionists certainly believe that life got started by its own, on its own, with nobody telling it what to do. Organic evolution, I think this is an obstacle that's impossible for the evolutionists to overcome. They believe in it, no question, they have faith and believe in it, but nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organized into a first living cell. Was it these chemicals then that got together and had these issues you were mentioning about a set of rules? Let's see, they work together for the good. All the chemicals have a right to survive, and therefore they decided to work together to create life. I think if you read over your list of things that evolution and slavery, you'd say, hold it, this wouldn't work on chemical evolution. And we could talk for days about that if you'd like to get more details on that. Let me get up to, I cover this on my video series number 4. Number 5, macroevolution, changing from one kind of animal into another. And I think this is where the debate really lies. nobody has ever seen a dog produce a non-dog. It doesn't happen. It's never been observed. We see big dogs and little dogs come from probably a common ancestor called a dog. But that's as far as it goes. And I often in my seminars do I get a 4 or 5 year old. I'll put a picture up like this one and say, okay, kid, here we have a dog, a wolf, a coyote, and a banana. Which one is not like the others? And I've only ever had one kid get it wrong. They said the boy. Well, I suppose that's true too, but it's the banana. So here's where the issue comes in. The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. Charles Darwin wrote a book called The Origin of Species, but most people don't read the whole title to the book. And this ties directly into what we're talking about here. When Charles Darwin wrote this book, 1859, there was still slavery in America. 1859, The Origin of Species. I don't think this book even shows the whole title. Is there another copy of this, Steve? They left off half the title. I've got the older, look at this. I think that's deceitful in this edition. Edited by Morse Peckham. The real title to the book is The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Darwin was a racist and thought one race had to be superior to another. So this doesn't have the whole title. There it is.
No, they all have that.
Well, now the little bitty one, the paperback I have, it has the title. The Origin of Species, you can look it up online, I'm sure, by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races. So if the evolution theory is true according to Darwin, the favored races should be preserved and the unfavored races should be eliminated. And this, of course, justifies all sorts of things, including slavery. It's good for the strong to subdue the weak. This was Adolf Hitler's philosophy in World War II. He thought the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norwegians were the superior race, and that the next was the Germans in that blonde-haired, blue-eyed, black-haired, dark-haired Germans were a superior race. So this goes right back to the issue of slavery. How do you determine if somebody deserves, let's call it up right here, part 5. There we go. Should one group of people be subjected to another? Is it slavery for humans to take apple seeds and plant them in a place where the human wants it to grow and make it grow there and produce fruit for the human, i.e. plant an orchard or plant a garden? Or is it slavery for the human to put a bunch of chickens in a coop and say, you're going to stay here, you can't go anywhere else, you stay here, you lay eggs, and when I decide to, I'm going to kill you and eat you? If indeed everybody's related like evolution teaches, I think you guys have a serious problem trying to explain animal husbandry or gardening. If indeed we're related to the tomato, do we have the right to enslave the tomato and make it grow in our garden and eat its offspring? Do we have the right to enslave the chickens or the cows and make them produce for us? So if we're going to talk about slavery and evolution, I think you guys need to paint with a wider brush here. It's not just humans, because the evolution theory teaches humans are related to chickens and cows and tomatoes. So where would you stop drawing the line? I guess I'd like to have an answer to, let's see if I can get this called up here. I've got plenty of evidence on the tie-in between slavery and evolution, where Hitler used this to completely justify what he did. I've got his list right here of who he thought was the superior human. It's in my seminar part 5, if you'd like to watch that. Oh, here we go. Slide number 266. Alt-DV 266, enter. Darwin's book, The Origin of Species. It looks like that, Steve, on the cover. It's paperback. There are varieties of monkeys. Are they different races of monkeys or just different varieties of monkeys? They are classified as different species. Are they different races? Here's Darwin's book, quoted in Heath Biology right here on the shelf. They call it The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. That's not the whole title. Here it is right here, the cover of it. The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. So if there's a struggle for life, evolution would say it's okay for the favored race to win. It's actually best if the superior race wins favored races. Darwin thought natives, black people, were just advanced animals. Darwin said in his book, The Descent of Man, another book that he wrote, at some future period, not very distant by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace the savage races throughout the world. So I guess I'm baffled on how someone who claims to believe in evolution can say slavery is wrong and immoral, because Darwin thought it was fine. He said, from the war of nature and famine and death, the most exalted object we're capable of conceiving, the production of higher animals, directly follows. Origin of Species, page 243. Of course, back in 1859, when his book came out, Negroes were for sale in America. Slavery was fine. Henry Fairfield Osborn, the leader at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, who was a strong believer and supporter in the evolution theory, he said the standard of intelligence of the average adult Negro is similar to that of 11-year-old youth of the species Homo sapien. Whoa, whoa, whoa. He's separating Negroes from the species Homo sapien. Stephen Jay Gould said biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1850, but they increased by orders of magnitude.
That's your 10 minutes, Ken. That's your 10 minutes.
I think evolution supports slavery and racism. Go ahead.
Well, the question really is slavery immoral, and can evolution explain that? I think we agree that well, let me just ask you, do you believe from a Christian worldview that slavery is immoral?
I do believe slavery is immoral, but in order to decide something's immoral, you have to have a ruler. If I said, cut me a board, on a long one, well, how long? Let's have a standard. Let's have either metric or standard English system. Let's give it in inches or meters or something. How do you judge what is immoral and not? Where's your standard? The Bible, there's a lot of slavery in the Bible, but it was by the heathen. It wasn't commanded by God. Go ahead.
Well, and maybe I don't want to interrupt you. I don't want to cut you off. I want you to make your points. I guess we're doing 3-minute back and forth. My question is, I think we agree that slavery is in fact immoral by both your worldview and my worldview. My worldview looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, and your worldview looking at it from a Christian perspective. You bring up a great argument that in order to determine what is moral and what is immoral, we need that yardstick. You said it yourself. Right. Now my system here, the argument that I put forward presents that yardstick. And you brought up many different examples of societies that endorsed slavery, and the two most prominent historical societies that endorsed slavery, and there are many more, no longer exist. They've been outcompeted by societies that made slavery immoral. The Nazis you mentioned, they're no longer around. The American South famously lost the war. Now it's an interesting thought experiment to try to discover if things that are moral are always aligned with humans' best interests. But I think that when you look at the evidence in the world, it seems that might actually be the case. Now, you also made a point about macro versus microevolution. You said cosmic evolution, stellar evolution, chemical evolution, macroevolution. I'm not sure if you said biological evolution. All of those are complete. What's that?
Organic evolution, the origin of life. That's number 4 of my list. Yeah.
So biological evolution. The evolution that I'm really honing in on, it relates to biological evolution, but it's a kind of a cultural evolution. Do you have? I think I've watched your debates before, and you accept evolution within species, right? You just don't accept speciation, correct?
Well, I would be careful of using the word accept, but I believe the evidence shows that there is a lot of variation available within the same kind. And I would be careful of the word species. There's never been a good solid definition of what is a species. But there's certainly variations within the same kind of animal. A dog and a wolf are different species, but they're the same kind of animal. A 5-year-old knows that. A dog and a mosquito are not the same kind of animal. But the evolution theory that I read in the textbooks, and I'm surrounded by hundreds of textbooks here, it teaches mosquitoes and dogs and pine trees have a common ancestor. I think that's ludicrous. I think that's not science. I think that's fairy tale, SpongeBob imagination stuff. I don't care if somebody wants to believe it, but it's not science.
Okay, well, I definitely believe in speciation, but it's not really relevant for the argument that I'm putting forward here, because
sure.
if we're talking about a group of people coming together and agreeing on a certain set of rules, and that group of people is going to be in competition with other groups of people, the groups of people are changing, but and obviously I accept that evolutionary change will take place at the individual level within the groups, within each groups. Like if a certain group develops a certain moral framework that it requires some biological changes in order to better implement that moral framework, maybe they're less easy to anger. They're less provoked to fight back or to foment conflict for no reason. They're less disposed to gossip needlessly about other people. Those biological changes could be incorporated, but they wouldn't be turning people into different species. So perhaps go ahead.
Today there are 57 countries in the world that are controlled by the religion of Islam, which endorses slavery and says actually slavery is fine, and they certainly practice it. I think there's probably more slavery in the world today than there has ever been in the history of the world. If you look at all the people enslaved in Muslim countries, they endorse it. Are you spending any of your time, energy, or money trying to fight what they're doing?
Very much so. We are out competing them economically. Those nations are depressed. They're some of the poorest nations in the world. They bolster my argument that slavery is slavery is immoral, and they would be best if they cease the practice of slavery and join the modern world. Many people have said that Islam is in dire need of a reformation, and this is the kind of reformation people are talking about.
And would evolution should that be taught in Muslim countries? Because it's not. I mean, they teach Allah created everything, whoever Allah is. But if slavery is immoral, and evolution would teach it's immoral, would teaching evolution in those countries help them, you think?
I don't know that it would persuade them to give up slavery. I think the religious arguments are probably far more persuasive. My interest in this topic is just to find a tangible, material way. Like you said in the very beginning, that we need a yardstick to be able to measure moral and immoral by. Once we start conceptualizing the world in this way, in groups in competition, I think intuitively a lot of people do conceptualize the world in this way. You hear people all the time say that you brought up Islam, that Islam and Christianity are, in conflict, that there's a world view that will sometime prevail. This is the common intuitive wisdom, that these two moral systems are competing with one another for members. So I just think if we look at those competitions and we examine the places in the world where the people have had the most success, both economically and just in low conflict, happy societies, we can conceptualize those behaviors as moral.
Well, let's take communism, for instance, which is strongly based on the evolution theory. Rose at the same time, 1848, with Karl Marx, who was a great believer in evolution. I covered that on my video number 6. They certainly, I think, would, by me anyway, be classed as an immoral form of government. People are forced, required, enslaved. Taxes in general would be a form of slavery, I guess, especially under communism, since everything belongs to the government, in their thinking anyway. We have slavery with the ants and the aphids relationship. And again, if indeed humans and ants are related to some common ancestor, should we be trying to train the ants and aphids to get along and not enslave each other? Ant colonies enslave other ant colonies and make them work for them. I mean, it's all over nature. It's only humans having this argument, I guess. And so I don't think evolution is going to be any help to the issue of slavery. It's because how can you have any standard at all? If your only standard is, well, what's good for society? Well, the ants and aphids, they've been doing this for a long time. They think it's, one of them thinks it's fine. The other one probably doesn't. So I think it's fine for me to raise tomatoes in the garden. I'm sure the tomato might not appreciate it. They'd rather be out in the woods, but that's my tomato. I'm going to plant it where I want. So I'm curious how you could say, where is your yardstick? Does it only include humans, or does it include the ants and the aphids, or does it include the vegetable gardens and orchards, or is this yardstick only apply to humans, and only certain humans? Doesn't apply to the Muslims. You think we have to simply outcompete them to prove it's true? I think that's a flexible yardstick, elastic one.
Well, I guess you're asking me if this argument is meant to prove evolution is true. I accept evolution is true. I'm not making this argument to prove evolution. I'm making this argument to have a better grasp of things that we intuitively think of as moral and immoral. I'm basically making this argument to flesh out that yardstick so we can start, when we disagree over moral or immoral things. Like, there's a huge debate in this nation over the topic of abortion. And I'm curious if we can apply, like, we don't necessarily know, we don't have enough information to make the same kind of argument that I'm making here with slavery with abortion. But if we think of morality and immorality in this way, we could potentially start collecting the type of information that we need to make that assessment. So abortion foments a certain amount of conflict in society that I think you will agree is not good for society. Like, it would be better if that was a settled issue. Like, in kind of a natural experiment, you could see where in a ancestral setting, different tribes may have had disagreements over things like abortion. They probably didn't disagree over things like abortion. They probably disagreed over things like, should we go look over the hill and potentially run into someone that might eviscerate our tribe, or should we stay here? But when those disagreements arose, those tribes could eventually break off into two tribes that were competing against one another based on philosophy, based on their moral outlook. And those moral outlooks eventually began competing with one another in say the Wall Street arena, where there's different corporate entities that are competing against one another. I would argue that in a strong sense, those corporations are competing on their culture. They have a culture that is very much a moral ethic, and a business that will outcompete another business will likely outcompete it because they have a culture that is more cohesive, more cooperative, makes people work harder. Those kind of cultures will beat cultures that frankly embody things like slavery, where you have, one population treating the other population as a parasite. You mentioned the animals and vegetables and that kind of thing. I think it's best to conceptualize like the aphids and the ants as a symbiotic type relationship and not a parasitic one. But there are parasitic ones in nature. I don't know that they can actually gain the kind of populations that we're talking about, because with this way of looking at the world, population size matters. America is a large population with a very good moral ethic. I would argue a better moral ethic than say China, because China has a larger population, but is not as they're catching up obviously, but not as economically viable as the United States.
Okay, well, a couple thoughts here. Let's go back to one topic at a time. It appears to me like the evolution theory clearly teaches, or couldn't be more clear, that the strongest should survive. Rockefeller loved the evolution theory. His corporation, Standard Oil, et cetera, were certainly not the kindest, and they eliminated the competition. They would go into a town, if there are 10 gas stations, and buy 4 or 5 of them, and they would lower the price down below cost just to run the other ones out of business and then buy the other gas stations. That's not kind. And pretty soon they own all the gas stations, and now they raise the price way above cost and make their profit back. So I think you're mistaken if you think the kindest and gentlest and are going to slowly win over. It's been the history of business that the most ruthless, the most ruthless bent over. Rothschilds, Rockefellers. I mean, there's a long list of people who were absolutely ruthless in their business practices to eliminate the competition. And I think what you're describing as where we would lean very quickly to communism. There shouldn't be all this this fighting within the businesses. So the government owns them all. I think that's where your thinking will lead directly down that road to we should have socialism or communism where the government runs everything, which would very quickly get into bigger, ask anybody in a communist country if it works. I have a daughter-in-law from a former communist country, and I've spoken in several communist countries, and they don't want it, but they don't, what do? If you disagree about it, they shoot you. You said you accept evolution as true. I love it when you guys keep using that word, accept evolution. I think you can only accept something that can be proven. You could accept the idea that 2 + 2 is 4, but I don't think it's logical for you to evolution. You're avoiding the obvious word. You believe evolution. Nobody knows.
You had a mic issue over there, Kent. Something changed with your microphone.
It looks like I've got a blurry issue too on your screen. Am I being filtered down or?
No, we're good. I think it's just the bandwidth.
Bandwidth, okay. Let's see, where did I get off on that? You cannot accept something that you believe. You're implying that if I don't, or something is wrong with me. You cannot prove to anybody that a dog and a cow are related or a dog and a mosquito are related. That is something you believe, and you should admit it's a religion, because by using the word accept, you're avoiding responsibility for having actually a religious belief, which is fine. Is it fine then? Is it moral for everybody to be forced to pay for your belief, evolution, to be taught in the school system? The school system currently teaches the evolution theory. I will call it a religion. Universally in America, all the public schools teach that. Yet 40% of Americans don't believe it, don't accept it, and yet they're forced to pay for it via real estate taxes. Real estate taxes pay for schools. Is it okay? Is it moral for me to be forced to pay real estate tax to support a school that teaches something I disagree with? Is that moral?
I think his mic cut out, Steve. I think that's what's. It seems like it's being picked up by. I can hear feedback too.
Is it moral for everybody for me, say me for example, we have a property here in Alabama, and we pay real estate tax on that, and nearly all of that real estate tax goes to pay for the public school where they teach evolution.
Let's swap mics out.
That is, I think, immoral. I'm going to get a new mic here.
That one's got a
dead battery.
There you go.
All right. According to evolution, the microphone should have gotten better automatically. Is it better now?
It's not really better, but I don't know what happened.
It's not really better. Okay.
I don't know what to do.
I still would like an answer.
I hear you great, Steve.
All people are forced to pay via real estate taxes for evolution to be taught. Is that moral to force the minority view on the majority in the public school system? But evolution is a minority view in America as far as atheistic evolution. Only 8 to 12% in most surveys would say there's no God involved and everything evolved from a common ancestor. That is certainly a minority view, but we're all being forced to pay. Is that moral?
Yeah, there you go, Steve. That fixed it. So I would.
Headset messing it up.
It was his headset messing it up. Okay. See, now evolution ought to make it better automatically. Anyway,
wouldn't
I still
it be
want an
great
answer.
if that
I'm not
would?
getting one there.
Go ahead.
All of us are forced. Everybody's forced to pay for evolution to be taught in the school system. Is that moral to do that?
Well, you bring up the idea of communism, and if we're talking about communism in the way that the government basically is exploiting the mass of the population to feather their own nest, it's difficult to say that itself is not a form of slavery. And
Correct.
yeah, so but this adds to my argument. It doesn't take away from my argument, because there's been every communist nation that's been tried has been unsuccessful. So if you're going to introduce the idea of communism, which is, I would argue, a variant of slavery, that would make the argument that slavery is immoral because it introduces inequities in society. That's my argument. That makes my argument perfectly. This is why slavery is immoral. I would argue this is why communism is immoral. Communism has the same exact problem that slavery has of innovation that I talked about, because if the fruits of your labor are going to accrue to somebody other than you and your family, you are disincentivized from innovating anything. And this is why communism fails. It fails for an evolutionary reason, the same reason slavery fails.
So if evolution favors the weaker surviving, actually it favors the stronger surviving, then the weaker are supposed to die off and be lost off, then according to evolution theory, the weaker don't have a right to survive. The strongest must survive. And you would see weaker organizations, like during the Civil War, the evolution theory would respond and saying, oh, well, the strongest have a right to survive. And what if the South would have won? Then they would say, well, then slavery's okay. And yet, I think most people with a brain would say, no, slavery's not okay. Slavery is wrong. It's immoral. It doesn't matter who wins this war. How do we determine right from wrong? Anyway, back to the issue at hand here. The abortion. If a mother decides, I don't want this child, and she kills her unborn child, does the unborn child have a vote in this? And if we're going to allow abortions, if that indeed is what the evolution theory says is okay, why does it stop at birth? I mean, the baby can't vote when they're 1 or 2 years old either. Should the mother be given the authority up until the kid's 2 years old to decide, I don't want this kid? Should a mother be allowed to kill her babies up until they're 10 years old? They're all take and no give. They're not helping at all up until they're probably, well, some are 18 or 20, still taking rather than giving. Does the mother have the right to make that decision after they're born up until they're 18? Or does this abortion only apply before they're born? Where does this fit in to benefiting mankind or benefiting that individual? You mentioned abortion. I think this needs to be thought of much further than that. Is abortion okay? Does that involve just the rights of the mother, or does the father have a right to say, no, honey, that baby's half mine, you cannot have an abortion? Is it only the mother who's capable of making the decision, or should the father be allowed? Should the grandparents be allowed to make a vote on this? Should they say, if their daughter wants an abortion, should the grandmother and grandfather be able to say, no, that's our grandchild, I refuse to let you abort it? Who exactly gets the power to make this decision?
Well, we're drifting off topic a bit. Drew, do you have questions from the chat?
Yeah, there's a couple that I think are good.
So I want to, before we go to questions, I want to ask Kent about the Civil War, just because it's a good example of the debate that we're having. Like I believe slavery is immoral, and I've made my argument why evolution explains why slavery is immoral. You believe slavery is immoral too, correct?
Correct, absolutely.
Okay, so America fought a civil war over slavery. Now, I would argue that the South could have never won the war because they had this bad piece of code in their moral system that was okay with slavery. And that made their group always weaker than the stronger group in the North. That's my argument. So, but what do you think would have happened if the South did win the war? Do you think it if it was possible for them to win the war, they could have won the war, and slavery would still be immoral, or slavery would be moral because it was legal? Was slavery moral when it was legal?
Moral and legal are two very different things. I mean,
yeah,
right
I
now
agree.
It's legal. It's legal in 57 Muslim countries. It's legal to have slavery. So
Right.
no, moral and legal is nothing. And slavery is definitely immoral. And the fact that the South had it, I'm sorry. I live in the South. I live in Alabama, where there was slavery 150 years ago. I would have preached against it then. There were many preachers preaching against slavery in the South while it was going on. They thought it was wrong. They thought it was immoral. Jesus' disciples preached against things. And they lived under Roman Empire. There's been slavery. That's been the history of the world. Jesus was born in Bethlehem because Israel was a slave. They had to go to their hometown to give a census or something. Otherwise, he would have been born up in Nazareth, where his mother and stepfather Joseph lived. So I think that this off topic, though, the slavery or any other thing that we do, is taxation slavery, certain taxes. Our speeding ticket slavery. You have to go this fast or else we're going to take away your money. Where exactly do you draw the line on all this? But again, off topic. Let's see. There's one thought I wanted to get across. I think the Bible would be very clear that all people have a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Those are the things our founding fathers felt this way. In America, they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain rights. So where do rights come from? The right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, they come from the Creator. But under totalitarian systems like communism or socialism, rights come from government. You only have the right to teach because the government says you have the right to teach. You only have the right to breathe. It'll come to that. Where do rights come from? I think they come from God, and He issues those rights. That's certainly what the founders of this country thought. That is not what the founders of communism teach. Well, go ahead. I'll get two more thoughts I'm working on.
Well,
here.
they at some point it does become slavery. I would argue communism is a type of slavery. At some point, when you have a small group of elites that are subjugating the mass of the people, it is a form of oppression, and that is what makes the society unstable. That is why societies where this doesn't exist will always outcompete societies where it does. This is why I don't think it was possible for the South to win the war.
Well, there are certainly countries today where those with slavery have won the war. Islam has conquered, how much? 57 countries in America now, and they endorse slavery. So I think it's incorrect. It just didn't happen that way in America, but there are dozens of other countries where the Muslims went in, took over, and killed anybody who disagreed, and they certainly believe in and practice slavery, and they did win. So the fact that it happened the other way in America, I think, would be the blessing of God. He didn't allow that to happen here, and slavery is evil and wrong. Just like it's wrong, I think, to force everybody to pay for one religion to be taught. I think the subject of religion should be separation of church and state. If somebody wants to believe in evolution, which I take to be a religion, not a science, there's nothing scientific about saying a dog and a mosquito are related. That's a belief system. That's not observable, it's not testable, it's not demonstrable. That's a religious belief, and you guys may believe it very strongly. Congratulations. But it's not science, and it shouldn't be taught to all the kids in public school at taxpayer expense. You guys should go start a private school, teach evolution to anybody who wants to pay and come learn it, and leave the rest of the kids alone. Most parents do not want their kids taught that, and it's not observable, it's not testable, it's not demonstrable. You do not know that a dog and a mosquito are related. This is a belief. I think it's a wild, crazy, stupid belief, but it's a belief, and you're welcome to keep it. I just think most Americans would agree with me We're sick and tired of paying for this religion to be taught in the school system. Take it out. Go start your own private school. You can have a private school in America and teach any religion you want. The Jehovah's Witnesses can have a religion. The Mormons can have a religion and teach that Adam was God in the Garden of Eden. And if they're good Mormon, they get to be God. That's what they teach. Okay, go believe that. But I don't want to pay for that. And I don't want to pay to have all the kids taught that their great-great-grandpa was a monkey or related to a monkey. And before that, it was a rock, because the earth cooled down and made a hard rocky crust, and it rained on the rocks and turned them into soup, and the soup came alive and evolved into the monkeys and humans. So grandpa was a rock. That's exactly what the theory says in a nutshell. I think that's ridiculous. And if you want to believe that, that's fine. This is not my grandpa. I don't believe that. And I resent having to pay to teach all the kids that it was. I think that's criminal. It shouldn't be done. So again, if you want to teach that in your private school, go for it. Teach whatever you want. But I think we should defund any school that teaches evolution. Take away their funding.
Drew, do you have questions from the audience?
Yeah, and actually we were coming up on our last 3-minute period there, so that actually worked out pretty well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so so I opted not to stop y'all. You were kind of stealing from each other's time, but I think it worked out just fine. So the first question is from Objective Believer. And here's the question. Every time atheists talk about coming up with morality without God, they seem to miss the primary issue on what authority makes one's view of morality authoritative over another. I guess that's just directed at Adam.
Well, different things will give different ideas different authority. From an empirical perspective, something is granted authority by evidence, by an overwhelming amount of evidence. I don't think that a belief in God is a bad way to enforce certain behaviors. It's a very intuitive way. And oftentimes our intuitions about things can be wrong. So I would say that we are better off looking at the actual evidence. So hopefully that answers the question. Like I understand that there is a grounding problem in my argument, because I'm presenting a lot of evidence that people may agree with or disagree with, and that it's easier if people agree based on this source called God. But I don't think it always delivers the truth.
Okay. So
if I get to respond to that,
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
there has to be a ruler, a yardstick for how do you determine morality. Is it majority opinion? If it's majority opinion, then Adolf Hitler said, well, hey, 55 million Germans agree, we should wipe out these Jews. And so they made a good start on it, killed 6 million of them, according to history books. So where does authority come from? Who makes this decision? Is right and wrong determined by an outside force like God, or is right and wrong determined by the majority? Because if majority determine right and wrong, in a true democracy, the majority could vote to execute the minority. You could have 51% vote to execute the 49%, and there's nothing they could do about it because majority voted. Or is there a higher standard? This was the problem with the Nuremberg trials after World War II. They said, we were doing what Hitler said. We were doing what the majority of the people wanted. This was within our borders. We had conquered this much land. We decided in this border, this is how it was. And the judges at Nuremberg said, there's a higher standard than your majority in your country. It's a real dilemma, I think, for the evolutionists to decide where is the absolute standard. We have a National Bureau of Standards, most countries do, to preserve what is a meter, what is a yard, and it's very important to keep a meter stick in an enclosed case, a certain type of metal that won't shrink or swell much, and it's in a certain temperature. It's important to keep a standard that doesn't change. So where is the standard for right and wrong if evolution is true? I don't think you guys can possibly have one. The standard, if any, would be majority opinion. If the majority of the lions in the pack think it's okay to kill the zebras and eat them, well, then they're going to go kill the zebras and eat them. I don't think the zebras appreciate that, but the lions do. That's their supper.
Well, my argument is I'm presenting the yardstick. The yardstick is the well-being of the vast majority of people.
So okay, it would be well-being. The well-being for the lions would be to go ahead and kill the zebras and eat them because now they get food. So the lions think that's wonderful. That's their well-being.
We're talking about interspecies, though. Is there another question, Drew?
Yeah, there's a couple. This one is more, I think, a clarification. This is for Kent. This person asked, is he suggesting that tomatoes or apples are self-aware? I think this is essentially about your points regarding enslaving non-sentient things such as vegetables and stuff.
So that's a fair question. That's a fair question. Are there people alive that we would consider humans? Are there people who are not self-aware? What if a person is sleeping and they're not self-aware? Are they now, or should we be allowed to kill them like we would kill an apple or a pear that's not self-aware? What if there's a child that's born that's mentally deficient in some way, or an adult that's mentally deficient and they're not self-aware? Is that how you determine whether they have these rights? If it's okay to enslave the tomatoes and the apples because they're not self-aware, would it therefore be okay to enslave the inferior aborigines because they're not self-aware? That's what the evolution taught. Or to enslave the blacks because they had the average intelligence of an 11-year-old, according to Henry Fairfield Osborn at the American Museum of Natural History. So if self-awareness is going to be the argument, I think you're going to very quickly find yourself trapped in a canyon here with no exit. That's not how you determine. Is there a higher standard above all of this? So I would say, to best of our knowledge, apples are not self-aware, and we enslave them by making them grow in our orchard. But if you're going to use evolution as the standard to say that's how we decide, well, then you got a real problem because babies are not self-aware. Unborn children, is it okay to kill unborn children? And the evolutionists generally would say, well, certainly, abortion's fine. Well, what about 10 minutes after it's born? It's still not self-aware. What about 2 years after it's born? Where would you draw the line? Is it what does that 2-minute trip down the birth canal mean? What does that change? If it's okay to kill the baby 5 minutes before it's born, why not 5 minutes after it's born? 10-minute difference is all. I think you're in a real slippery slope here when you start saying, I think abortion's okay because the mother has rights. Well, then the child has rights. And after the baby's born, is that a burden on the mother? Well, yeah, she's got to babysit the thing for years and feed it. Is that a burden for the father? Why don't we allow parents to have abortions up until the kids are 18 years old? Next time they act up, bang, you're done, kid. What is the difference?
Do you agree that groups are in competition with other groups, that nations are in competition with other nations, corporations are in competition with other corporations, religions are in competition with other religions for members and
sure,
and
parts
resources?
of my body are. My right arm's in competition with my left arm, wanting to get the nutrients that I get, okay? My head's in competition with my hind end when I sit too long and want to get up and squirm around because it's uncomfortable. Yeah, different cells in my body are in competition with each other. Competition is not necessarily bad. But yes, I agree, competition happens.
But your body itself is more in cooperation and in competition with other bodies. Like you're obviously in just talking about your right and left arm being in competition with one another, and there is some of that, but they're in collaboration as well. So my argument is just that, and it seems that you at least partially agree that groups are in competition with other groups.
Correct. And if one is being unfair, who should be the judge of what's unfair? And what should we do to the one that's playing unfair? If the group of lions is in competition with the group of zebras, and they are, okay, who can run the fastest? Who should get out there and intercede? Should we go shoot all the lions because they eat the zebras? I don't think the zebras appreciate it at all, what the lions do to them.
Right. You've said a few times that evolution is about the strongest surviving, and it's really not. It's about filling an ecological niche. So it doesn't always have to do with strength. And I mean, there was a time in our history when nations would conquer other nations, but really in the modern age, we're more in economic competition. It's more of a game type arrangement where one one nation is struggling to out innovate another nation. That's how we outcompete one another. Where, you know, in days gone past, we would have just invaded and subjugated the people. So it's a much different situation right now.
There's still a lot of invasion and subjugation going on. If
Definitely.
you take Muslim countries or all over Africa, they have wars constantly going on between their neighbors, subjugating and taking. And sometimes it's more local than a whole nation. It's just one tribe subjugating another tribe, taking over their territory. The Japanese tried to take over the whole Pacific realm, and they did succeed for quite a while during World War II. And that was based on their belief in evolution. They said, we're the superior race. They pointed to the fact that Japanese have less facial hair, less body hair, and a milder body odor. They said, we've evolved further. It was evolution that motivated them to say, look, it's our duty to take over the world and eliminate these inferior species. Do you think people like me who believe in creation should be eliminated from the classroom, from teaching public school kids?
So are you making the argument that the belief in evolution can motivate behavior that's incorrect? Because it seems like you could make that argument with the belief in God just as easily, that bad behavior can be motivated by the belief in God.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Where is the standard for right and wrong? Thou shalt not kill is a standard that God gave, and yet the lions don't follow that. They go kill the zebras. They go kill their fellow lions. The new male lion takes over and kills the cubs from the previous male lion.
Lions don't organize. Lions don't organize in the same way that human beings do. But do you have any more questions, Drew?
Yeah, I have another good one if you're still wanting to answer questions. So I guess this is directed at Adam. This question is, what is science? The government has been lying about so-called facts for forever. I guess this question is essentially, how do you know that your yardstick is accurate, given that there is biases in science and stuff like that?
I mean, we do our best. We obviously there is a peer review process that is highly susceptible to human bias, and I would argue that human bias is our greatest problem. But I mean, we definitely make discoveries over time. I mean, all of our technology is evidence of that. So science is just an empirical process of testing the natural world and being able to make predictions.
I would like to add to that, if it's peer review, in other words, your peers, your fellow people in the same field, then in North Korea, it's peer reviewed that this Kim Jong-un, or whatever his name is a great guy. He's a wonderful guy, greatest thing that ever happened. And you don't dare disagree with that. And communism is wonderful. You don't dare disagree with that. All the peers agree that communism works and communism's wonderful. It's been peer reviewed. That's you'd be real careful about going down that road. Under Nazi Germany, it was peer reviewed. Hitler's the greatest thing that ever happened. Joseph Stalin made sure all of his peers thought he was the greatest thing that ever happened. Execute anybody who disagrees. So that we're kind of that way in America when it comes to science and evolution. The peers, those who are peer reviewed, say evolution's true. And you don't dare dissent from that, or you're kicked out of the club. You're not executed in a concentration camp yet, but in Nazi Germany and communist Russia, they sure were. And they could say the majority believe this. The majority believe communism works. Joseph Stalin's a great guy. Because anybody who disagrees ended up in Siberia or killed. So I think people today who disagree with evolution end up in academic Siberia. Watch the movie Expelled with Ben Stein, where he shows testimony after testimony. People say, yeah, it's anybody who doesn't agree with this minority view of evolution is expelled from the classroom. It's happening in America. I think it's sad.
So I'm conceptualizing morality as a set of rules that binds a voluntary group into a community. Now, I agree that these communities can be grounded in a lot of different ways. I think science can give us ideas on what the rules of that community are going to facilitate the best possible environment for people to live. But I don't know that science is a great way to inspire people to adhere to those rules. So I think religion may beat science in that department. You've been very generous with your time, Drew. How long have we gone? I don't want to keep Kent longer than he agreed to.
It's certainly been a while. I haven't been keeping track of it. It's been, so we did the 10 minutes at the start. We had the full 30 minutes for the back and forth, and we've been going on questions for a while. So if you want to close with closing statements, that's fine. And if you want to shorten the time on those or whatever you want to do, it's up to you.
Do you want to? Are there any more questions?
I think that the only thing left that's worth responding to is there's some people that are hung up on this strength versus fitness thing when it is regarded to evolution. They didn't ask a direct question, but I would like to give Ken an opportunity to respond to see if he wants to clarify if he was just talking about strength or if he was just using strength as like a stand-in for fitness in terms of evolution.
Okay, well, I think it's very clear. Darwin thought that only the strongest have a right to survive. He would feel that way with it applied in all things in nature. The fastest lion gets his supper, the slow lion doesn't get it, so he dies off, and that over time makes all the lions faster. He thought it was a wonderful thing, the struggle for life, the preservation of favored races. I think it's very clear. Evolution teaches the struggle for life, and the strongest are the only ones who have a right to survive. It's really best if the inferiors die off. Adolf Hitler took it to the logical extreme. Well, let's speed up the process then. He had a list of who he thought was inferior and wanted to eliminate them. Hitler's list, made up by a Catholic priest in 1907, Hitler went on that list. At the top of the fit was the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norwegian, and at the very bottom of the list was the Jews, close to pure ape, Hitler said. The list said by the Catholic priest. Right above the Jews was the blacks. Hitler hated the blacks. When Jesse Owens, the black American athlete, won the most gold medals in the Berlin Olympics in 1936, Hitler refused to shake his hand and walked out of the stadium. He said, "It's not fair to make my men race against this animal." So I think the logical conclusion from evolution is even humans would be divided up into superior and inferior races. I think that's extremely stupid. I think there's only one race called the human race. It's called mankind. And I think that evolution teaches you really can't distinguish that way, that we have a common ancestor with the apes. And if you keep going back this hyper-imaginary tree that they draw, lines on paper, we have a common ancestor to the amoeba with everybody. So how on earth can you eat a tomato? That's your cousin. I don't think they get it. How can you drive on the highway? That's made out of your grandpa, the rocks. I think it's one of the dumbest religions I think evolution is a religion, and I think it's the dumbest religion in the history of the world and the most dangerous religion. And it certainly shouldn't be forced on kids at taxpayer expense. And you don't accept evolution, you believe evolution. You should just admit it.
As an atheist, I can honestly say that the theory of evolution is a very poor religion. Like it does not bind people into collaborative and cooperative groups. If anything, from my own experience, it does quite the opposite. So I guess we'll move on to my final statement. I guess I'm going first, Drew. Is that because I went first, or?
If you open, then I would suggest you going first so that he can get the final word.
Okay. So I'm just going to go back to my basic argument where I was saying that we're better off if we conceptualize morality as this set of rules a community adheres to voluntarily as it competes against other communities for resources and members. Communities with better moral systems will grow in both size and prosperity. And as Kent pointed out many times, there are majority Muslim countries that we are in competition with. And I would argue that our Western Judeo-Christian democracies are out-competing those nations in tangible wealth. And so this system where we're in competition with another, obviously over time, forces some communities with better moral systems to thrive while other communities shrink and eventually dissolve in the same kind of evolutionary process that drives any individual organism. So Slavery is both a behavior and an institution that weakens these societies through the promotion of conflict and the discouragement of innovation, which are the two drivers of this evolutionary process, and therefore is a bad candidate to be included in any successful moral system, including ours. That's all.
Okay, my turn.
Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for doing this. It's an honor. I'm glad to defend the creation view against all comers. I think the Bible teaches very clearly that God created everything in 6 days. I don't know of any other possible way to explain all the millions of symbiotic relationships. For example, animals breathe in oxygen, give off carbon dioxide. Plants breathe in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. We reciprocate the gases. According to the Bible, they were created within a couple days of each other. That's not a problem. According to evolution, they evolved slowly over millions of years. That's a problem, a real problem. I don't think there's any scientific evidence for any animal ever producing offspring other than the same kind that it was. Dogs produce dogs, cows produce cows. There are no exceptions. If you choose to believe that, that's fine. As far as you mentioned, the rules the community adheres to voluntarily. Well, what if you get one that doesn't want to adhere to the rules? Should he be forced out of the community? That's, to me, what it would imply. Anyway, I don't think the evolution theory has a standard to go by. They don't have a yardstick. You can't determine right and wrong. If you're determining right and wrong by majority opinion, then if one person in that group doesn't want to do that, if the lion doesn't want to do what the rest of the lions are doing, is that immoral? Is that wrong? Is he kicked out of the group? Anyway, I think it's more logical to say, if I see anything like this ink pen, I could say, this thing had a designer. I have no idea who it was or where it was, but I'd be willing to bet $1,000 this thing was designed. It didn't happen from an explosion in a plastics factory. It had a designer. Who was it? I don't know. When? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Step number one is there was a designer. I think if we look at the human body, look at a single cell. You say this thing had to have a designer. A single cell, any cell, plant cell, animal cell, any cell is millions of times more complicated than the space shuttle, let alone an ink pen. So yes, I think it's absolutely insane to not believe there was a designer of life on Earth and designer of the Earth itself. Now, who was that designer? Is it Allah, Buddha, Jehovah? That becomes a different set of arguments. But getting over that first hurdle is where you seem to be stuck. You don't want to admit there's a designer at all. That's like walking through the woods and finding an arrowhead and saying, you have to explain how this thing came to be, but you cannot use man as your example. Did that arrowhead get formed by exfoliation or thermal expansion of the rock or abrasion or... It's a human made it. There's no other logical answer. There's no other logical answer than to say something outside of this planet created this planet. Something outside of time, space, and matter had to create time, space, and matter. God, the God of the Bible, claims to be eternal. He's not stuck in time. We're stuck in time. He's not stuck in space. We're stuck in space. I can only be one place at a time. And I think it's just, when you do stand before the God you don't believe in, I think you're going to be very embarrassed when he shows you how simple it is, how simple it was. You had evidence all around you and chose to ignore it. I feel sorry for you. I'd like to win you over to Christ. Come visit Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama, straight north of Pensacola. We'll give you a tour of the place, and I'll explain to you how you can have your sins forgiven and become a child of God. I'd be honored to do that. Thank you.
Well, I may take you up on it someday just to see it.
Okay, come on down.
Well, thank you, Kent. You've been very generous with your time. I will go ahead and end our stream here. Like I said, links to everyone's channel is in the description below. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.
All right, thank you.